Zina could hardly stop smiling the day her fiancé told her about the family trip. To her, it felt like a doorway opening, a chance to finally feel like she belonged with his people. In the bustling city of Ocambra, she spent the evening packing carefully, folding her best dresses, polishing the only pair of gold earrings she owned, and imagining how the trip would bring her closer to them. She pictured laughter over shared meals, long walks by the resort gardens, and nights filled with stories and warmth. For Zina, this wasn't just a vacation. It was the chance to be seen as more than the girl their son had chosen. She wanted to be part of their family, not just by name but by heart. Her friends teased her as she double-checked her modest suitcase, reminding her she didn't need to impress anyone. But she knew in her heart this trip mattered. She thought, if they see the real me, kind, respectful and eager, they'll love me too. As the busyness of Ocambra moved outside her window, Zina's heart raced with hope. She had no idea this trip would change her life forever, just not in the way she dreamed. Would you like me to now expand point 2, the hidden disdain, in the same detailed emotional way? The trip had barely begun when Zina started to feel the weight of their disapproval. At first, she brushed it off, convincing herself that she was just nervous, but the whispers soon became too sharp to ignore. As they gathered at the station, her fiancé's sister eyed her modest suitcase and let out a laugh that wasn't hidden at all. "That's all you brought? For a luxury trip? Even our maid carries more than that," she said, loud enough for others to hear. The words stung, but Zina forced a smile, clutching the handle of her suitcase tighter. When they boarded, the jokes continued. His cousins glanced at her earrings, the small simple gold hoop she had saved up for months to buy, and exchanged smirks. "So plain," one of them muttered. "My brother's ex used to wear real diamonds." Every comment was like a needle, tiny but painful. Zina tried to stay quiet, hoping her fiancé would defend her, but he sat silently, avoiding his family's eyes, pretending not to hear. That silence cut her deeper than their words. By the time they reached Maburi Hills, Zina felt smaller than she ever had. She had come with dreams of belonging, but every laugh and every comparison made her feel like an outsider. Instead of being welcomed, she was measured against invisible standards she could never reach. They didn't see her kindness, her quiet strength, or the love she carried for their son. They only saw what she lacked. And yet, Zina kept her head high. She told herself, if I stay kind, if I stay patient, they'll see who I really am. But deep inside, a voice whispered that maybe no amount of patience could change hearts that had already decided she was not enough. Do you want me to move on and expand point 3, the cruel decision, into the same style next? When the car finally pulled up to the Grand Resort in Maburi Hills, Zina's heart lifted for the first time that day. The place looked like a dream. Tall palm trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, golden lights glowed from the windows, and the scent of fresh flowers drifted through the air. She thought maybe this would be the moment things changed, maybe here she would finally be welcomed. Guests were stepping out of shiny cars, greeted by smiling staff, and she imagined herself walking with her fiancé's family as one of them. But the moment they stepped inside, reality hit harder than she could have imagined. While the family chatted excitedly with the receptionist about their suites, Zina stood quietly by the side, waiting for her turn. That's when his sister turned to the group with a cruel smile and said, almost laughing, "Oh, there's no space for her in our rooms. She can sleep in the kitchen. Isn't that where she belongs?" The words echoed in Zina's ears like thunder. For a moment she thought she had misheard, but then she saw the others smirk, some even nodding as if it was perfectly acceptable. Her fiancé said nothing. He simply looked down at his phone, pretending to be busy, while her heart broke in silence. The staff froze, their polite smiles faltering as they glanced at Zina with pity. She felt her cheeks burn, not just from shame but from disbelief. She had come here with hopes of being embraced, of sharing laughter and building memories, and instead she was being pushed aside like she was nothing more than luggage. Clutching her small bag, Zina swallowed her tears. She refused to let them see her cry. But inside something shifted, a quiet realization that love without respect was no love at all. That cruel decision wasn't just about a sleeping arrangement, it was their way of telling her she didn't belong. Do you want me to continue with point 4, the humiliation, in the same emotional viral style? Zina's chest felt heavy as the receptionist handed out key cards to the family. One by one, they walked off proudly toward their luxurious suites, dragging along their shiny suitcases, laughing and talking as if nothing cruel had been said moments ago. No one even glanced back at her. No one thought about where she would go. She was left standing near the kitchen entrance, clutching her small bag, her feet frozen to the polished marble floor. A staff member approached gently, almost whispering, "Madam, would you like to sit?" His eyes carried pity, and that pity cut deeper than the insult itself, because pity meant they saw her pain. They knew she didn't belong in that moment. Zina tried to smile, but her lips trembled. She whispered, "I'll be fine," though she wasn't. Her heart was breaking piece by piece. She stood there, listening to the clatter of dishes, the hiss of pans, and the laughter from the suites above. That night, when the resort finally grew quiet, Zina sat alone on a bench near the back garden. The stars above Maburi Hills glittered like 1,000 tiny eyes, watching her as she fought the heaviness in her chest. She could still hear faint laughter drifting down from the suites where her fiancé's family enjoyed their evening. Every laugh felt like another reminder that she wasn't wanted, that she was just an outsider forced to stand on the edges of their world. She could have cried, she could have begged for kindness, but Zina refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Instead, she took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, and rose to her feet with quiet strength. She realized in that moment that staying meant accepting their cruelty, and her dignity was worth more than any relationship. With steady steps, she walked through the resort's grand lobby. Staff members noticed her leaving, their eyes soft with concern, but no one stopped her. She held her head high, even though her heart ached. She whispered to herself, "I don't belong where love has no respect." Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. The city lights shimmered in the distance, promising freedom beyond the walls that had humiliated her. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew she was walking away from pain, from silence, from being made to feel less. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. By the time she reached the road leading toward the airport, Zina felt lighter. She wasn't running away in shame. She was walking away in strength. That was the night she chose herself, her dignity, and her worth, even if it meant leaving behind the man who refused to protect her. Would you like me to continue with point 6, an unexpected encounter, in the same emotional and viral storytelling tone? The airport was quiet that night, its polished floors reflecting soft golden lights. Zina sat in a corner of the lounge, her small bag by her side, trying to look composed though her heart was still heavy. She had wrapped her scarf around her shoulders, hoping it would shield her not just from the chill in the air, but also from the storm of emotions inside her. She kept her eyes on the floor, afraid that if anyone looked too closely, they would see the sadness she was trying so hard to hide. It was then that Idris Mbeki walked in. He wasn't loud or flashy, yet the whole lounge seemed to notice him. There was something about his presence, calm, steady, and dignified, that made people turn their heads. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that needed no words. When he sat a few seats away from Zina, she felt an unusual sense of ease, though she didn't know why. Their eyes met briefly, and Idris offered a gentle smile. "Traveling alone?" he asked in a warm voice that felt more like a comfort than a question. Zina hesitated, unsure if she should open up, but there was kindness in his eyes that made her nod. "Yes," she whispered, her voice soft, almost breaking. They began to talk slowly at first. He asked simple questions, but with every answer she gave, he seemed to notice more. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she shifted in her seat as if carrying an invisible weight. Finally, he said quietly, "You've been hurt, haven't you?" Zaina froze. She wasn't used to anyone seeing through her so quickly. She wanted to deny it, but her silence spoke louder than words. For the first time that day, someone had looked at her not with pity or mockery, but with genuine concern. And in that unexpected moment, sitting in an airport far from home, Zaina felt the smallest spark of hope flicker inside her again. Shall I continue with point 7, the invitation that changed everything, in the same detailed and emotional way? As their conversation went on, Zaina found herself speaking more than she had planned. Idris didn't rush her, he didn't judge, he just listened. There was a patience in his eyes that made her feel safe. For the first time in days, she felt like her voice mattered. When she finally laughed softly at something he said, even she was surprised at the sound. Then Idris leaned back in his seat, his tone still calm but carrying quiet weight. "You know," he said, "I spend most of my days in Maburi Hills. It's my second home." Zaina's brows furrowed, confused. "You live near the resort?" she asked. Idris gave a small smile and shook his head. "Not near. I own it." Zaina froze. The words almost didn't make sense. This man, gentle, unassuming, and warm, was the owner of the very resort where she had been shamed and pushed aside. She felt her heart race, embarrassment washing over her as she thought of how the staff had looked at her earlier. What would he think if he knew the full story? Sensing her hesitation, Idris leaned closer, his voice steady. "Zaina, people's cruelty doesn't define your worth. I saw strength in you the moment you walked in here, even with sadness in your eyes. You carry yourself with dignity most people can only dream of." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Idris continued, "I'm heading out on a flight, first class. Come with me. You deserve better than what they gave you today. Let me show you what respect looks like." Zaina's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her bag. She hesitated, torn between fear and an unfamiliar spark of possibility. Her entire world had been rejection just hours before, and now here was an invitation that could change everything. "Do you want me to move forward and expand point 8, first-class freedom, in the same rich emotional storytelling style?" Zaina had never stepped foot in first class before. As she walked down the quiet aisle of the plane with Idris by her side, she felt like she had entered another world. The wide leather seats stretched out like small thrones, glowing lights shimmered softly above, and the air itself felt lighter, calmer, almost royal. A flight attendant greeted them with a warm smile, bowing slightly as she offered champagne. Zaina hesitated, clutching her bag nervously, but Idris gave her a reassuring nod. "Relax," he said gently. "You belong here." She settled into the seat beside him, sinking into comfort she had never imagined. The glass of champagne in her hand sparkled under the lights, and for the first time in days, her lips curved into a real smile. She took a slow sip, the bubbles tingling against her tongue, and whispered to herself, "Is this really happening?" From the window, she watched the runway lights blur as the plane prepared for takeoff. Each second that passed seemed to wash away the sting of the humiliation she had endured. Hours ago, she had been standing by a kitchen door, treated like she was less than human. Now she was seated in first class, next to the very man who owned the resort where she had been shamed. It felt like life itself had shifted, like fate had stepped in to remind her that dignity could never be stolen. Idris glanced at her, noticing her quiet smile. "See," he said softly, "the world always makes room for those who know their worth, even when others try to push them aside." Zaina felt her heart steady. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't trying to shrink herself or prove her value. She simply existed, calm, radiant, and free. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't just a flight, it was a new beginning. Shall I continue with point 9, the return to Maburi Hills, in the same style and depth? The sun rose gently over Maburi Hills, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. Zaina stepped out of the sleek black car with Idris by her side, her heart beating in disbelief at where life had carried her in just a single night. The same gates she had walked through with shame now opened wide for her with honor. Idris walked beside her calmly, his presence commanding quiet respect from everyone who saw them together. As they entered the grand lobby, the staff who had once looked at her with pity now straightened their uniforms and bowed their heads. "Good morning, Sir Idris." "Good morning, madam," they greeted warmly. Their voices carried a tone of reverence that Zaina had never experienced before. For a moment she stood still, remembering how she had been left standing by the kitchen door, invisible and humiliated. And now, those same eyes looked at her with admiration. Her steps were steady, her chin lifted, her dress swaying softly as she walked through the marble hall. She wasn't a forgotten guest anymore. She was Idris Mbeki's honored companion, treated with the dignity she had always deserved. The whispers that had once mocked her were gone, replaced by respectful silence. Even the receptionist who had watched her humiliation the day before now lowered his eyes, as if ashamed of what he had seen. Zaina felt no need to boast, no urge to throw her triumph in anyone's face. The quiet respect that followed her was enough. Inside, her spirit stood taller than ever. She had walked out of this place with pain, but she had returned clothed in dignity. What none of them knew was that this return was not just about walking beside Idris, it was about proving to herself that she was never small to begin with. Shall I continue with point 10, the family's shock, in the same emotional and dramatic storytelling style? The family was seated in the lounge that morning, sipping coffee and laughing loudly as if the world belonged to them. They didn't expect to see Zaina again, certainly not in a way that would make their voices falter. But when the glass door slid open and Idris Mbeki stepped inside with Zaina at his side, the entire room seemed to still. Zaina walked gracefully, her arm resting lightly on Idris's, her posture tall, her face glowing with quiet confidence. Gone was the girl who had stood by the kitchen door, eyes full of shame. In her place stood a woman radiant, calm and untouchable. The family's laughter stopped mid-breath. Cups of coffee were set down slowly, hands trembling. Eyes darted back and forth, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. His sister, the one who had mocked her the loudest, felt her jaw tighten, but no words came out. The cousins who had once compared her to better women shifted uneasily in their chairs. Even his mother, who had carried herself with pride and superiority, lowered her gaze as if the ground itself had betrayed her. And then there was her fiancé. His face turned pale, his lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no sound followed. He looked at Zaina as if he had never truly seen her before, realizing in that moment that the woman he allowed his family to humiliate was standing arm in arm with the very man they all respected, a man who owned everything around them. Zaina did not glance their way for more than a second. She offered no bitterness, no words of anger. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Every step she took past them was a reminder that she had risen above their cruelty, and they could never pull her back down again. Would you like me to now move into point 11, the public respect, with the same detailed, emotional and viral storytelling style? The dining hall of Maburi Hills glowed that evening, filled with chandeliers, soft music, and the quiet hum of powerful conversations. At a long table where the resort's most important guests gathered, Idris sat proudly with Zaina by his side. She wore a simple but elegant dress, nothing loud or glittering, yet she carried herself with such grace that all eyes seemed to find her naturally. When the time came for introductions, Idris rose with his usual calm authority. Placing a gentle hand on Zaina's shoulder, he said, "This is Zaina, a woman of rare grace and intelligence, someone whose strength and dignity deserve every respect." His voice carried across the hall, strong enough that even the farthest corner heard. The words struck like lightning. Businessmen and dignitaries nodded politely, smiling at her, some even rising to shake her hand. They spoke to her with genuine interest, asking questions, listening carefully, treating her as though she was the most important woman in the room. Meanwhile, not far away, her fiancé's family sat at a separate table, forced to watch every moment. The same people who had laughed at her modest luggage and mocked her earrings now kept their heads low, their cheeks burning with shame. No one dared to make a joke, no one dared to whisper. The silence around them was heavier than any insult. Zaina didn't need to look their way. She could feel their regret. But she didn't gloat, she didn't raise her chin in arrogance. She simply smiled gently, answering each question with calm confidence, her voice carrying softly yet powerfully through the hall. In that single evening the story flipped. The woman they had tried to push into the kitchen had become the one honored in the dining hall. Respect had finally found its rightful place, at Zaina's side. Shall I now expand point 13, the mother's regret, with the same emotional and dramatic tone? Her fiancé waited until the hall had emptied a little, his pride crushed but his desperation rising. He found Zaina near the balcony, the soft night breeze brushing against her hair as she looked out at the glowing hills. For a moment he hesitated, unsure how to approach her. But then he forced himself to step forward. "Zaina," he began, his voice unsteady. "Please, about what happened, it was all just a misunderstanding." His words tumbled out quickly, as if speed could erase the pain he had caused. "You know my family, they can be harsh, but they didn't mean it like that." "I didn't mean it like that." Zaina turned slowly, her eyes calm but piercing. She didn't interrupt him. She let him speak, let him struggle. He shifted on his feet, hands twisting nervously. "I should have defended you. I know that. I was just caught off guard. But I love you and I can make it right. Just give me another chance." She looked at him for a long moment, her silence louder than his excuses. Finally she spoke, her voice steady but filled with quiet strength. "You watched me be humiliated. You let them strip me of dignity while you stayed silent. That is not love, it is betrayal. Love without respect is poison, and I will not drink it." Her words struck harder than a slap. He reached for her hand, but she gently pulled it away, her face serene, unshaken. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply done. In that instant, he realized he had lost her forever. Not to Idris, not to circumstance, but to his own silence. Zaina turned back toward the view, the wind lifting her scarf slightly as if carrying her away from everything that once chained her. For him, regret had only just begun. For her, freedom had already arrived. "Do you want me to move ahead and expand point 13, the mother's regret, in the same deeply emotional and viral tone?" His mother had always carried herself with pride, her voice often the loudest in the room, her laughter sharp enough to cut. She was the one who had mocked Zaina's small suitcase, the one who had sneered the cruelest words about her simple jewelry, the one who had smirked when suggesting the kitchen was good enough for her. In her eyes, Zaina had never been worthy of her son, never polished enough, never fit for their family. But now, sitting at the corner of the dining hall, she could no longer hide behind her pride. She watched as Idris introduced Zaina with admiration, watched as respected men and women leaned closer to listen when she spoke, watched as her son's fiancée, the girl she had once treated like nothing, shone brighter than anyone else in the room. For the first time her laughter was gone. Her hands, once steady, trembled slightly as she lowered her gaze to her untouched glass of wine. The shame pressed heavily on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She thought back to the kitchen door, to the way Zaina had stood silently while everyone else mocked her. She remembered the look in the young woman's eyes, hurt but still dignified. And now she understood. That dignity was the very strength that had lifted Zaina to this place of honor. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to undo the cruelty of her words. But it was too late. Respect, once denied, could not be demanded back. She realized with bitter regret that she had mocked the very woman who now stood higher than she could ever dream of standing. Her son's silence had cost him love, but her cruelty had cost her something even greater. The chance to embrace a woman who could have been a daughter, a blessing, and a legacy of grace. "Do you want me to continue with point 14, the woman who knew her worth, in the same heartfelt and viral tone?" Zaina sat at the grand dining table with elegance that required no effort. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't glare at anyone, and she didn't throw their cruelty back in their faces. Instead, she carried herself with a calm that silenced the entire room. While others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding her gaze, she simply picked up her fork and tasted the food as though nothing in the world could disturb her peace. Every smile she gave, every soft word she exchanged with Idris and his companions, carried more weight than 1,000 angry replies. She knew that revenge wasn't necessary. The truth had already unfolded before everyone's eyes. The same people who once laughed at her now watched her in silence, realizing that dignity was her loudest weapon. As the evening went on, she listened attentively, laughed softly at jokes, and spoke with a quiet confidence that made people lean closer to hear her. The family who had mocked her could only sit back, powerless, as the world around them shifted. Zaina had become the center of respect, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through her grace. When the meal was over, she rose gracefully from her seat. She didn't look back at the family, didn't wait for their approval, didn't seek their apology. Instead, she walked out of the dining hall with her head high, her steps light and her heart free. In that moment, Zaina understood her true power. She didn't need their acceptance to define her worth. She didn't need revenge to feel victorious. Her silence, her composure, and her unshaken dignity had already made her the most respected woman in the room. Do you want me to finish with point 15, the ending they never expected, in the same strong emotional style? By the end of the trip, the story of what happened at Maburi Hills spread far beyond the resort walls. Guests whispered about it in the lobby, staff retold it in quiet corners, and even business partners carried it back to the city. The wealthy family who once walked with so much pride were no longer remembered for their money or their luxury. They were remembered for their cruelty, for the way they had pushed a young woman toward the kitchen as if she was undeserving of dignity. But Zaina's story rose above theirs. People remembered the way she carried herself with grace even when humiliated, the way she chose silence over shouting, and the way fate lifted her higher than anyone expected. She wasn't remembered as the woman mocked for her small suitcase or her simple earrings. She was remembered as the woman who walked out of shame and into first class, arm in arm with the man who owned the very resort where she had been rejected. Her quiet dignity became her crown, her strength became her story, and her triumph became the lesson that no cruelty can bury true worth. Zaina had entered the trip hoping to be accepted by a family, but she left it having embraced herself. And that, more than anything, was the ending they never expected. Do you want me to stitch all 15 parts together into one smooth 4,000-word script so it reads like a complete flowing story instead of separate sections?